Welcome back to the Secular Homeschool Revolution podcast. This podcast is for secular progressive homeschoolers who are reimagining education in a very unapologetic way for their kids. I am your host, Ashley. Today's topic is my 5 hot takes on homeschooling. But before we dive in, I do want to give a short life update and some shout outs. So first, I want to shout out to everyone who reached out to me via Instagram or TikTok on Secular Homeschool Revolution is my handles, or my website, secularhomeschoolrevolution.com, who sent messages checking in to see if I was okay because I hadn't posted any new episodes. Thank you. And some of y'all about 5 of you guys were really funny and I really appreciate it. They're like, hey girl, did you stop recording because you ran out of topics? I got you. So thank you for the content. Next, I just want to address that I was really, shining in some areas of my life and I was failing in other areas of my life. So I had to pause, take some deep breaths and recalibrate some things. So since the co-ops ended and the micro schools ended, and also for our co-op, we are opening committees. So that's putting more time back in my life. So I'm really excited about that. So I don't, so me and my co-founders don't feel overwhelmed by all of the decision making and the planning. And I will say, I do think we kept some things so close to our chest because we just thought the space was so, special and sacred and intentional. And we had to look at ourselves and say, okay, guys, we need to trust the community. So we are on a journey of creating committees for different areas of our homeschooling organization. So with all that being said, I am back. Let's dive into the episode. So my first hot take is unschooling done wrong is neglect. Homeschooling done wrong can be hard too, but for this first hot take, we're talking about unschooling specifically. If you've listened to past episodes, you know how I feel about unschooling. And I really don't care if you come after me. I have read some John Holt. I have read some Peter Gray. And I do believe kids are natural learners. I also believe some of y'all have taken child-led learning to mean what you want it to mean. And it's translating as I stopped teaching and parenting, and we're going to call that philosophy. And I just don't know how you can use that philosophy to explain why your 11-year-old cannot do basic arithmetic or read a chapter book. So a couple of things aren't happening, right? We're not cultivating the love of storytelling and reading, or we might have a learning difference that needs to be addressed and supported. Because even if they're learning like the phonics of the sounds, but are they getting the critical thinking, the main idea, the climax, like picking up the nuances of reading? Unschooling, I do believe that unschooling is beautiful. And I think it's one of the most intentional ways to homeschool. But I think a lot of people misunderstand that it requires more parental involvement and not less. And that you do actually have to curate the environments. You have to follow your kids' interests with actual resources, and you have to check in with them. It is a very demanding pathway to take. And I do believe it works when people actually do it in a right, intentional way. But the version that's being sensationalized on social media, that's not the philosophy. It is a child being failed by adults who were supposed to protect them, and they want to wrap it in this progressive vocabulary and say, things like, oh, you just understand this is the new wave of education, blah, 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 so that nobody asks too many questions. I'm asking questions. And especially for BIPOC kids, Black kids, brown kids, we just don't have the same margin of error. The world is not charmed by Black and brown kids who have authentic curiosity when they show up unable to read or write a coherent sentence. I really want you to understand that unschooling needs intention, it needs support, and most definitely it needs accountability. And if you don't have that, you need to call it something else. Most likely something towards child neglect. My second hot take is all-in-one programs are killing critical thinking. So I'm saying Time4Learning, Mia Academy, even the ones that are state funded, like the Connections Academy, first of all, their marketing is exhausting. And I get the appeal, right? I get it's hands off. That's one less thing you have to do. Compared to like curriculum purchasing and things, it seems like the cheaper option most of the time, because you can put them in front of a computer, you can hand them a tablet, you can do school on the go, and you see the little progress bar moving, so you're like, oh, I get a peace of mind that they're going through some information, they're learning it, and you're like, I am accomplishing homeschooling and laundry and whatever else I have to get done at the same time. But the problem is, I feel like when that progress bar you're looking at that's giving you some comfort, it's tracking completion. It's not tracking comprehension. And the structures for most of these online programs is watch the video, then you're going to click the right bubble, and then you're going to get a check mark, and then you move on, and then you have the one, correct answer, then you click it, and your child feels good, you feel good, then we're on to the next lesson. And we are training kids to be multiple choice machines in a world, right, that we really don't know which avenue it's going. But if we're allowing the computers and the softwares to think for us, our kids need to be the ones that can think in full paragraphs. And the research on these model-based instructions versus project-based learning or inquiry-driven learning, it's not subtle. It's not even close, because kids who learn through questioning, through wrestling with like real problems, and they have productive struggles, like it's good for them to struggle. They're really using that brain power, and you're like, okay, there's some gaps here. We need to assist here. And they learn to work through it. Those will be the ones who navigate systems that, question their competence. And critical thinking is not, it's not enrichment. It's strength. It's armor. It's support. And I know it's hard when you see a $30 a month subscription, which is more feasible for our budget. Because let's be honest, a lot of us, especially if you don't have, state funding to support your homeschooling, or you opted out, or you're on one income, that sounds better than front loading $400 or $500 on curriculum, right? I do think you should use these tools as a supplement if you must, but for a whole curriculum, I do think there needs to be a bigger conversation. I know when I had my last kid, I did use some of these softwares because I was in the middle. It was COVID. Kids needed to get some learning done. My husband wasn't able to support as much as he does now. And I put them in on the programs, and at least they were retaining some information. But even at that, I still would sit there and ask deeper level questions like, well, why did you choose this answer? Why didn't you choose this answer? Let me see your work. Let me show, So I was very hands-on through the process. And I also encourage you to use these programs when you're first starting homeschooling, but slowly wean yourself off, because it can feel overwhelming when you're trying to teach all of these subjects, right? Or if you're just giving one like a math subject on the computer and you're teaching history or reading or outsourcing in other ways, but this shouldn't be, in my opinion, and take it how you will, the only option in your homeschooling journey. My third hot take is secular homeschoolers can absolutely indoctrinate their kids. So this take is not pointed at conservatives, because I feel like in the homeschooling world, you're either conservative or you're secular, or you are a progressive secular homeschooler. And for us, we like to point our fingers when we hear indoctrination at the conservatives because we think of a very specific kind of homeschooling family. And it's not us, because we have the diverse book collections. We have bell hooks and Walter Dean Myers and Nikki Giovanni. And we think we are the enlightened ones because we are decolonizing our homeschooling history. And indoctrination in itself isn't about content, it's about method. So when you present your worldview as the only valid one, you shield your kid from opposing perspectives rather than teaching them to engage critically and, reward agreement while, discouraging questioning. And that is indoctrination. And regardless of whether the content is a Bible verse or, something around social justice, I have seen progressive secular homeschoolers, parents do that exactly, or they want their kids to only socialize with one type of kid. I get that. But the goal of a truly liberatory education is not to pour your values into your kid like they're this vessel. It should be to raise a thinker who is able to arrive at their own values, and they can pull through inquiry and evidence and lived experiences. And that's going to have to require us, because sometimes I get lost in the sauce too, to say, here is a perspective I deeply disagree with. And let me tell you why. And we need them to be able to build those building blocks on why they feel this goes against their values. And that is hard, especially if we're coming from our own backgrounds, our own worldviews, our own, perspectives. That can be hard to define that line for our kids. And my husband was telling me, because my kid had made a comment, I was like, whoa, okay. And we were having to take a step back and think about some things. And he was like, we have to have some intellectual humility in this process. Humility, that's so hard sometimes, but we got to own it to grow. Being uncomfortable gives us the ability to grow, right? So with that, I'm saying if your kid has never read something that challenged, your worldview and learned how to refute it with evidence, you're not raising a thinker. You are raising a kid who can be in agreement with you. And the thing is that the world is going to test that the first day they leave our site. And I do think that's interesting because on a Reddit thread, I was looking through information on how I wanted to write this episode, but I did see on a Reddit thread where somebody who was from a progressive background ended up deep diving into the conservative world as soon as they left their parents' house, and they just didn't understand what the big deal was. And then, people were challenging their statement, and it really was that they were like, they just told us this was so bad, and I wanted to do anything that went against what my parents stated. And I know there's layers to it, but it happened. So we got to make sure our kids can think critically and they can learn to articulate and defend their values that they developed, even when it doesn't necessarily align with our personal ones. I even tell my kids, because we're we don't do religion in my home. I'm not anti-religion, but we're not religious in my home. And I tell my kids, one day you might want to be religious, or you might find a following that resonates with your heart. And You will have to be able to accept my point of view and I'll have to accept your point of view. And so, like religion, it's not a no in our house, but we definitely have dived into religious texts. Even with Easter, I let them, or they asked to watch the story of Jesus. And that was really good because they had so many questions and I was open to answer them. But it also, more importantly, gave them comfort and safety to know that they could ask these type of questions to me and their dad. Hot take number 4, homeschooling is not for everyone, and that's okay. So the homeschooling community, I'm in it. I'm saying this with love and with some judgment, and even judgment for myself, but I feel like there's this weird savior complex because a lot, even with like the content or random discussions with homeschooling parents, it's like, I chose to homeschool because I deeply love my kids, or you should homeschool if you loved your kids. If you knew what the system was, especially for Black and brown kids, you should pull them. And then if you can't, there's some judgment passed, or if you can't make it work or you're overwhelmed, they're like, you must not love your kids as much. Something to that context. And I do want to be clear that a single mom who's working 2 jobs, who's trying to be as present as possible, who's showing up to IEP meetings or PTA meetings or PTO meetings and school board meetings, and just trying to do the daily work of keeping her kids seen, that single mom is doing something, or a single dad or a single parent is doing something that is radical and important. She's not failing her kid. And she does not need our pity, our judgments, our eye rolls, or anything about deschooling. She, at that moment, is doing, or they are doing exactly what they can do. And some kids genuinely thrive in school. They need that structure. They need the variety of adults. They need that extra space. They need more peer energy. And, not every kid's optimal environment is a kitchen table or on the couch or road schooling or world schooling. And whether we're in homeschooling or not, our job as parents is to fight like hell, for every family to have the ability to have funding, to have livable wages, to have actual resources, to have healthcare. So that's why we need to make sure we're advocates not only for our own families, but for other people. And micro schools and pods and hybrid programs and magnet schools and charter schools and private schools, they're there for a reason, to give kids options. Now, do we have an issue with equity in that regard? Absolutely. But we should be offering mutual respect between every family and the difference that they offer for their kids, because most of the time these people are really busting their butt to do what's best for their family with what cards they are dealt. Hot take number 5, homeschooling has a dark side and we need to welcome some accountability. This one right here I think it gets me a lot of side eyes from people in the homeschooling world who don't want the government to have any oversight. And I get that. I see that you don't have oversight because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you don't trust the government. I don't trust that government either. And it's just really, really hard. But we can acknowledge that homeschooling has been used to hide abuse. This isn't my opinion. This isn't a theory. There are cases documented of kids being pulled from school, removed from institutional line of sight, and they are later found in conditions that are devastating to read about. Again, and I'm not trying to make a smear campaign because I homeschool, right? But I want you guys to be aware that the the curated, intentional space that you have for your kid is not every story. And so what do we say? F them. They don't matter. That's their life. And I do feel like our homeschooling community's, overall response always to all of this is don't regulate us. They don't want government overreach, or abusers will abuse regardless if they have any kind of oversight. And while those comments aren't entirely wrong, it does have an impact on protecting the institution at the expense of kids. And that's just not something I'm willing to not keep talking about. And I get it. The fear of regulation and oversight has been historically weaponized against especially communities of color in ways that are very violent and dehumanizing. And I'm not naive about what accountability can mean in the wrong hands. And also, a kid's safety is not a bargaining chip for me in a political argument about educational freedom. I do think there should be some annual check-ins. I think there should be one required interaction with the mandatory reporter per year. I think there should be a way to account for kids, because like here in Texas, school districts are losing kids in droves. They're not going to another district. They're not going to different charters. They're not going to private schools. They don't have a way to track them in micro schools or homeschooling in that way. And I think an annual check-in to account for this kid is important. And if this community, show up and say, hey, here is what reasonable accountability looks like, and here's what we will not accept, I feel like we get to shape it. And maybe I'm thinking in La La Land. I understand the political climate that we're in, but we still always need to advocate for kids, whether they're in public school, traditional school models, or homeschooling. And if we stay silent and we get defensive, that says a lot about us. And I promise it will not be shaped with our families in mind, and I know that. But I would rather be uncomfortable in this conversation than comfortable while a kid is not okay each and every single time. So, I'm going to ask you this. What accountability measures do you support in homeschooling, being an advocate for kids? Before I let you go, I do want to let you know I'm not standing outside of this community throwing stones. I am in it. I am active. I'm parenting inside of it. I'm educating inside of it. I am leading inside of it. And I also have made some mistakes, and I've had to sit with that. I've had to process it and understand what that discomfort was growing me into. These 5 takes didn't come from a place of judgment. They came from a place of love that I got tired of being polite. I'm putting my stake in the ground. I do think there should be some regulation around homeschooling. And a lot of you might be big mad, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. And I specifically want to say directly to Black, Indigenous, brown families who are out here doing this work. And, oftentimes we don't have as many resources, in the sense that we don't have as many curriculums and stories telling and mirroring for us, right? We have to go and find it. We have to live under twice the scrutiny, and we get none of the credit, right? Even if you see the most amazing article about a Black homeschooling student who got all the scholarships and all the universities or started a business, there's always criticism. Well, I see you. And this show doesn't exist to to fall into just traditional homeschooling norms, but it exists because of you, because we needed a space. And every episode and every hard conversation and every take that almost didn't make it in the mic, I think it's for you. It's for our kids. It's for the community, because we are actively building in real time, and it's messy and it's imperfect and it's on purpose, and that's okay. So before we close out this episode, I do need you to do one thing. Please share it. Please share my podcast, and not just with the people who already agree with you. Share it with the person in your group who does need to hear how unschooling is impacting their family, and as a community, you can see it, right? And you want to gently nudge it. Share it with the family who's sitting on the fence about homeschooling, or, drop it in a chat with your group chat, or voice being in this conversation, because it does need to be heard. And if you haven't already, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. I know you hear that every episode from every podcast, but I mean it differently, because every follow tells the algorithm that this perspective, this unapologetic BIPOC homeschool voice, is having real conversations, and it matters, and it belongs in the room, because it does. And I do think we need to amplify it, and we need to be louder. I encourage you to come visit on my website, www.secularhomeschoolrevolution.com. And bookmark my podcast as your favorite. It's on as many platforms as you listen to podcasts. And if this work has meant something to you, if you ever listened and felt less alone, or learned something or sent an episode to someone because it sat with you and it made you think, please send me a coffee. I'll have the link in my show notes. This show is a labor of love, and I mean that in the most literal, unglamorous way possible. Every cup that I receive, it keeps the mic on. It keeps me, finding more space and having honest conversations coming in and sharing with you guys. I am grateful for every one of you who show up here week after week. And also, do y'all hear the commercials during my show? That means I had enough listeners to start getting monetization. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Because you're not just listeners, you are part of the community, and this community is doing something that matters. This work is important, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Secular Homeschool Revolution.